I never knew my parents. My mother died under mysterious circumstances, and my father vanished shortly after my birth. They said he couldn't handle his grief and went off wandering, though I always suspected there were other, more sinister explanations. I grew up in other people's homes, shuffled from one orphanage to the next. I never stayed in one place long, and in every new household, I felt an undercurrent of hostility directed at me. Perhaps it was only my imagination, but I sensed a cold fear in people as soon as they learned about the circumstances of my orphaned fate. Every new family seemed steeped in secrets. I noticed glances lingering on my face longer than usual, hushed adult whispers at night, and anxious sighs behind closed doors. The atmosphere around me was always grim, and I learned early on that there was no room for childish joys in my world. Loneliness became my constant companion. In the city's nighttime streets, I wandered in search of answers, hoping that the darkness might reveal what daylight could not. Sometimes, I even frightened myself. I felt that deep inside I possessed a peculiar gift, or perhaps a curse, that allowed me to sense the presence of unseen forces. At the orphanage, people's eyes would turn distant when I silently appeared behind them, as if I were a shadow rather than a human being. Over the years, I learned to live in that gloom, accepting it as part of my nature. I was rarely noticed, and if I was, people made sure to steer clear. Even as a teenager, I felt the call from the dark depths of my soul. As strange as it may sound, I was drawn to things that frightened others. Abandoned buildings, cemeteries, places marked by old tragedies. There, I felt the pull of something ancient and unfathomable. No one understood me, and I made no effort to explain. I felt far more at peace in forgotten corners, where laughter was absent and fake smiles unseen. At times, I sensed a sinister presence watching me from afar, playing a strange game of endurance. I couldn't put it into words, but it sometimes seemed as if not only did I choose the darkness, but the darkness chose me. When I came of age, I was confronted with a harsh reality. Without an education or connections, I was destined either for menial jobs or a slide into a life of crime. It felt as though the world was laughing at me, offering nothing more than a dirty corner in a damp basement and mere scraps to survive on. That's when the idea of joining the army emerged, as an escape, a chance to leave behind the burdens of my past. I never dreamed of becoming a hero or gaining public acclaim. Rather, I hoped that by donning a uniform I could cheat fate and hide from prying eyes. The military promised shelter, even if it was a harsh and brutal one. Yet deep inside, I harbored a vague hope that in military service I might finally find the family I never had. I longed to meet people who shared my pain and my fear of the unknown. It was a naive thought, but it lit my path in the darkness. I believed that perhaps, through hardship, discipline, and risk, I could find a place where I wasn't just an abandoned orphan, but a soldier among those like me. And even if it meant facing the very dark forces that had shadowed my life since childhood, I was ready for that challenge. When I first set foot on the parade ground at the draft office, the air was thick with a mixture of fear and determination. I was surrounded by strangers, people just like me, and in the eyes of those standing nearby, I could read the despair hidden beneath their masks of concentration. I barely exchanged a word with them. Simply watching how they tried to stand tall, straightening their backs and concealing inner panic with rehearsed gestures was enough. At that moment, all I could think was that here lay my chance to leave the past behind. The paperwork took several hours to process, but eventually the gates opened before me, leading to the training center where I was to be assigned to a company. In the beginning, everything was utterly standard: registration, a medical exam, physical tests. I didn't stand out in any special way, except that they noted my stealth and my ability to endure pain. During running drills, I observed some recruits quickly growing exhausted while I continued running, gritting my teeth as if something terrifying were chasing me. That something had always been inside me, driving me forward and never allowing me to relax. Perhaps the inner dread of my own past helped me move faster. Soon, I was summoned to an officer's office where he casually flipped through my documents. I saw him tense up as he read about my family. He scanned the papers and then looked at me intently. I remained silent, revealing nothing. In that moment, I realized that no one here was going to try to understand me. They would simply aim to use my skills for their own purposes. That suited me fine. I was seeking refuge, not psychological support. Then I was offered the chance to undergo additional tests for selection into a special unit. They claimed they were looking for individuals unafraid of unconventional situations and ready to operate under conditions beyond the scope of ordinary military operations. I knew what that meant. I'd have to confront that mysterious, frightening world that had always stalked me. I agreed without hesitation. I had nothing to lose, and a strange curiosity stirred within me. At last, I could put that part of my nature, drawn to darkness and unknown threats, to use. The tests were designed to assess endurance, resilience, and the ability to maintain composure in the most horrific scenarios. Officially, they were called extreme training exercises, but I suspected that those dark corridors, bursts of light, and eerie sounds were far more than mere drills. Those who couldn't withstand the pressure were ruthlessly eliminated. I watched some recruits emerge with pale faces and trembling hands, as if they'd experienced an indescribable horror. I, however, remained silent and composed, striving not to succumb to fear but to use it as fuel for survival. In the end, I was inducted into a special unit where, according to rumor, they carried out missions never disclosed to the public. I wasn't given time to ponder. I began training almost immediately, knowing that from now on my life would be intertwined with shadows and threats that ordinary people preferred not to acknowledge. Perhaps I'd been seeking refuge, but what I found was a path far grimmer than I had imagined. And though I wasn't entirely sure I was ready, deep inside, I felt that only here might I find the answers to the questions that had tormented me since childhood. Training in the special unit was unlike anything I had ever experienced. General physical conditioning was merely the foundation. We were taught not only standard hand-to-hand combat and marksmanship, but also methods to fight adversaries whose capabilities defied human logic. We were immersed in the atmosphere of night operations where silence, rapid reaction, and nerves of steel were paramount. I saw new recruits breaking under the weight of endless demands, some falling into despair, others into a strange numbness, as if confronted by a dark truth capable of driving one insane. I, on the other hand, felt a sort of sinister comfort. Whether it was a blessing or a curse, I harbored no illusions about human nature, and the nightmares of these exercises only confirmed my inner conviction that the world was far grimmer than it appeared. We even had classes in tactics against so-called supernatural threats. We studied materials on creatures that official reports labeled as anomalous objects. The dossiers were filled with photographs, newspaper clippings, and notes featuring werewolves, vampires, and beings reminiscent of reanimated corpses. I wasn't surprised by the existence of such creatures. Since childhood, I had sensed the presence of something elusive. But now, seeing concrete descriptions, eyewitness accounts, and scientific conclusions, I realized that reality was far more monstrous than any urban legend. The psychological strain was heavier than the physical fatigue. Sometimes they showed us video recordings of past operations, where soldiers encountered gruesome, bloody scenes. A wail echoed off camera, and on the screen, shapes flashed that defied description. I noticed the room growing cold, even though the air conditioners were off. People watched the footage, trying to remain calm, but their eyes betrayed minds, struggling on the edge of acceptance. I was scared too, yet perhaps fear manifested differently within me. At times, I even found a strange exhilaration in that grim world, as if I saw my reflection in those monsters. Moral dilemmas were equally harrowing. We were trained to act without pity when it came to eliminating a target. Supernatural adversaries often possessed intelligence, and in some cases, even human emotions. We were told that succumbing to emotion could jeopardize an operation. From the command's perspective, these beings were not human, but anomalies that had to be eradicated in the name of civilization safety. I listened, trying to understand if it really could be that simple. After all, if you can feel fear, pain, and loneliness, then you are a living being, even if encased in something unhuman. Yet my inner darkness whispered that sometimes the beasts within us are far more terrifying than any mythical monster. Over time, my skills sharpened. I learned to shoot a moving target in pitch-black darkness, to detect an enemy's presence from barely perceptible rustles and scents, and to endure long periods without sleep. But the most crucial lesson was learning to control my own terror. They told me fear was the enemy, but I believed otherwise. Fear is an instinct that can keep you teetering on the edge of the abyss. I simply learned not to let that instinct paralyze me. In the end, when true missions arrived, I was ready to stare death in the face without flinching. The shadow that had followed me since childhood finally made sense. I had learned to harness it in battle, keeping a cool head and a will to survive honed to its very edge. One day we were gathered for a closed briefing. In the cramped room, there were no projectors or bulky boards with operational plans, only thin folders marked top secret. We were ordered to open them and review their contents. A couple of blurred photographs, several pages of reports, and a map of a region in Michigan. From the documents, I learned that somewhere deep in the forests, a creature, officially classified as a werewolf, was at work. Survivors described it as a monster with a wolf's body that walked on 2 legs and possessed unimaginable strength. The locals were terrified, and the authorities had been unable to stop the bloody attacks. Command explained that our mission was to eliminate the werewolf so it would no longer threaten people. However, an equally important condition was to provide proof. According to higher-ups, rumors of such creatures needed either to be kept under strict control or completely debunked to prevent mass panic. That's why we were ordered to bring back the creature's head, so military experts could later study it and, if necessary, hide everything from the public. Images from training films flashed before my eyes. The decapitation of a monster, its distorted face, drops of dark blood splattered on the snow. The prospect filled me with uneasy apprehension, but I already knew it was futile to resist fate. I was assigned as the primary operative because I had proven to be the most effective in solo missions. The risk, of course, was enormous. The werewolf was not only a deadly creature, but also resistant to conventional firearms. The folder contained instructions for using special ammunition, silver bullets designed for such cases. Yet even with them, the odds remained uncertain given the creature's strength and speed. Orders were not up for debate, and besides, I felt an inexplicable pull toward this mission, as if my entire existence was yearning for a trial in which I would finally confront darkness in open combat. Inner doubts tormented me. Over the course of my service, I had come to understand that supernatural beings were not always evil by nature. Sometimes, circumstances, being trapped in a hopeless situation or losing one's humanity under the influence of a curse, turned them that way. However, orders left no room for reflection. Thoughts of morality quickly receded when it came to protecting innocent lives. The army didn't ask us to be humane, it demanded results. Yet deep down, I felt that each operation like this left wounds that would never fully heal. A day before departure, I stood in a dim corridor contemplating my plan. I had to find the creature's lair, catch it off guard, and eliminate it as quickly as possible. Otherwise, the werewolf might lie in wait and regroup, turning its hunt on me. Every detail had to be planned. The location to set the trap, escape routes, contingency plans in case things went awry. Yet despite my experience, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a realm where human rules no longer applied. I wanted to believe I knew how to handle this monster. But a whisper in my mind warned that in such encounters, the victor never emerges unscathed. I arrived in Michigan on military transport under the cover of night. A biting, icy wind struck my face, and gray skies promised an imminent snowfall. The area to which I was sent lay far from any major city, hidden among endless coniferous forests. An air of apprehension hung over the region. The locals seemed afraid to leave their homes after dusk, and whenever I appeared, they quickly averted their gaze. I could feel the atmosphere of fear steeped in the history of bloody attacks that were best left unspoken. First, I made my way to an abandoned military base where reconnaissance data and some equipment awaited me. In containers, I found silver bullets of various calibers, several types of traps, and a couple of experimental tear gas grenades, specially modified for a non-typical adversary. There, I also received a brief report on the latest attacks. The victims had been found near an old mine, abandoned decades ago. This information was crucial. Most likely, the creature had taken up residence in underground galleries or nearby caves. I studied the maps, trying to figure out how to approach it from the flanks so as not to miss the werewolf if it sensed danger. But the Michigan forests in winter were a deadly trap even for ordinary people. I was to operate alone, relying solely on my experience and intuition. I spent a day preparing, checking my weapons, calibrating my optics, and planning my routes. Outside, a blizzard was gathering, and I could hear the winds howling that seemed to echo the thought that soon I would have to hunt a predator as intelligent as a human and stronger in body. In those moments, I found myself gripped by a strange sense of anticipation. It seemed that deep down, I was already ready for this hunt, as if it had been destined for me from the very start. Perhaps it was only an illusion, but it helped maintain my resolve. At night, I set out on reconnaissance, clad in warm gear and keeping my weapon at the ready. The stark trees, draped in snow, looked ghostly in the moonlight. In places, the snow was streaked with reddish-brown stains, reminders of past bloody skirmishes. The cold squeezed my lungs, yet I pressed on, determined to catch any traces, scents, or sounds that might reveal the werewolf's lair. I moved almost silently, thanks to the skills honed in the special unit. All I could hear was my measured breathing and the pounding of my heart, which in the silence seemed especially loud. The deeper I ventured into the forest, the more heightened my alertness became. It seemed that any movement behind me could turn into an attack, and every shadow among the trees might spring to life. Yet, in that very environment, I felt utterly focused. Fear charged me, keeping my muscles tense and my mind crystal clear. I could not afford any mistakes. If I slipped up, the werewolf would surely seize the chance to tear me apart. While surveying one of the creature's possible haunts, I stumbled upon deep tracks, partially covered by snow. The size of the prints was clearly larger than human. They led further toward steep, rocky outcrops cloaked in thick moss. I decided these were my primary indicators. I returned to base at dawn, exhausted yet satisfied that I'd found a lead. Now I had a foundation for my plan. Every detail had to be meticulously mapped out. How to lure the werewolf, how to track its movements, how to ensure a clean shot. Yet even after planning it all, I couldn't entirely shake the fear. Deep down, I suspected that the creature was aware of my presence, waiting for me just as I waited for it. The day had come when I finally resolved to set out on the path of war. I made my way through swirling snowstorms toward the rocky gorges where, by my calculations, there might be an opening to the mine's underground passages. I was lightly armed, a rifle loaded with silver rounds, a pistol at my side, a few grenades filled with a special gas, and a knife with a silvered blade. The wind blasted prickly snowflakes into my face, and the sky appeared as heavy as lead. The entire landscape was deathly white, as if it had been erased with an eraser, leaving behind only the stark image of snow-covered trunks and bare branches. When I reached the entrance to the narrow gorge, I heard a faint roar that froze the blood in my veins. Though the sound was muffled by distance and wind, it carried an unmistakable fury and inhuman strength. I knew the creature was aware of my approach. Perhaps it was picking up on my scent or hearing my footsteps. Yet I pressed on, every moment anticipating that a shaggy figure would burst forth from behind the nearest rock. A plan began to form in my mind. I needed to secure a strategic advantage first. I laid several traps in the narrow passages to restrict the werewolf's escape routes and stashed extra silver rounds in my pockets so I could reload quickly if things turned to close combat. Soon, I encountered unmistakable signs of the creature's presence. Gnawed bones scattered near the cave entrance. The blood on them was partly frozen, yet still relatively fresh, and the stench of decay and dampness assaulted my nostrils. Inside, fear and determination warred with each other. Each step became more cautious, each breath heavier. Gradually, I plunged into the half-darkness of the underground corridor, illuminating my path with a dim flashlight clutched in my left hand. At a bend, I heard movement and instantly switched off my light. Through a slender beam of moonlight seeping through a crevice, I could make out a shadow moving with unimaginable grace. It was enormous, unnaturally elongated, with a hunched back and massive paws. The creature noticed me almost instantly, emitting a deep, guttural roar. My heart pounded, but I managed to take aim and fire my rifle. The silver-cored bullet thundered with a crashing echo throughout the cave. The werewolf howled and recoiled. My shot hadn't killed it, but it had injured the beast, which was no small victory. Without hesitation, I lobbed a gas grenade, banking on it to disrupt the creature's supernatural sense of smell. A hissing sound arose, and the corridor filled with acrid smoke. I had to shut my eyes and cover my mouth with my mask to avoid breathing in the gas. Then, hearing another roar from the other side, I realized that the werewolf was moving faster than I had anticipated. Bullets ricocheted off the cave walls, sending stone shards flying. I understood that I had wounded it, but not incapacitated it, and in such conditions, the beast could strike at any moment. Suddenly, from the shroud of smoke, it lunged at me, disarming me in an instant. A sharp blow slammed into my chest, sending me crashing against the wall as I nearly lost consciousness. before me loomed a monstrous figure, its yellow eyes blazing with primal fury, and its gaping maw dripping with saliva. It seemed poised to tear me apart. At the last moment, I whipped out my silvered knife and struck wildly, pouring every ounce of my remaining strength into the blow. The werewolf howled and staggered back, clutching a wound on its neck. Seizing the opportunity, I drew my pistol and fired several precise shots at its head. The creature twitched and collapsed onto the stone floor. My heart pounded even louder than at the onset of the battle. I could feel my hands trembling and my pulse thundering in my ears. But I knew it wasn't over. Many of these creatures could regenerate unless extreme measures were taken. With a groan, I severed its head, feeling a mix of horror, revulsion, and relief as it dropped with a dull thud, leaving an ominous silence in its wake. That was the cost of victory. When I finally emerged from the underground, the sky was already beginning to brighten. A gray dawn painted the snow in pale tones, and the wind had subsided, as if acknowledging the tragedy of the night. I carried a blood-stained bag in my hands, a grim token that my mission was complete. I was utterly alone in that white silence, saturated with the scent of death. My mind buzzed, and time and again, the details of the fight resurfaced. Burning eyes, a monstrous roar, the crunch of breaking bones. I tried to steady myself, yet inside, wild fear still throbbed, intermingled with a peculiar sense of triumph. After covering several kilometers, I arrived at the temporary base. Officers met me and without many words took the ill-fated bag and carried it into a secured hangar. In their eyes I read a blend of respect and revulsion. Not many had ever been forced to present the head of such a dangerous creature as a trophy. They only said that the higher command would greatly appreciate my accomplishments and that I could finally rest. But rest? There was no rest to be had. My very being was scarred by the experience, and I felt as though an even deeper darkness had settled inside me. Later on, I was formally commended. The records showed a terse report on the elimination of a particularly dangerous target, with no details regarding its nature. Among high-ranking officers, sparse applause echoed and words of gratitude were exchanged for fulfilling the duty. But did I feel any joy? No. Sitting in an empty barracks, I reflected on how every encounter with the spawn of darkness left an indelible scar on my soul. I watched some soldiers strut with their heads held high, reveling in their newfound status as heroes. But my story was different. That moment when I gazed into the eyes of that creature reminded me of my own desolation, that within me there was no light strong enough to fully dispel the gloom. Soon, plain-clothes bureaucrats arrived at the unit and took down my account, a terse report that omitted the true details, warning me never to divulge any specifics of the operation under threat of disciplinary action. I agreed, not out of fear, but because I did not want to dredge up that bloody tale again. Scenes from the past flashed before my eyes, and I realized that this was merely the beginning of a long journey. A journey where one victory would never be enough to dissipate the darkness that shrouded me. A heavy, lingering sadness settled within my soul. I thought about creatures like the werewolf and wondered how many more such monsters lurked in the darkness. At the same time, I pitied myself. I could not return to a peaceful life by pretending that none of this had ever existed. I had become something of a bridge between two worlds, the world of humans and the realm of nightmarish creatures. And though the command gave me an approving handshake, I knew that such a gesture condemned me to endless conflict with the darkness. Later, I was told that other members of the squad had already been deployed on new missions, while I was left at the base pending special orders. I felt like a prisoner, unable to speak of what I'd witnessed, unable to live as if nothing had happened. The memories of that beast's roar and my own rage at the sight of my vanquished foe haunted my dreams. I knew that such experiences never pass without leaving their mark. One day, I'd be called upon for another such mission, and I wasn't sure I'd be able to keep the remnants of my humanity intact. I was called to headquarters to discuss the prospects of further service. They said that soon there would be a new assignment in another region where anomalous killings had been observed. A chill overtook me as I realized it would all happen again. Blood, fear, and cruelty, cloaked under secrecy, weighed on my mind. I knew that if I agreed, I would be forever ensnared in this cycle of violence. But could I refuse? Even if I managed to escape, what was I supposed to do in civilian life? There, no one awaited me, and the past would not release its grip. After packing my things and preparing for new challenges, I felt my heart beat with tentative optimism. Another operation lay ahead. New territory, new myths that I would either have to debunk or validate in blood. I didn't know when it would all end or if it would ever end. But one thing was certain. I was no longer that abandoned orphan tossed from one orphanage to another. Now I was a soldier, having witnessed firsthand how real that darkness was, the very darkness spoken of in hushed tones. And perhaps my path lay in bringing light into that darkness, even if I was already half consumed by it. Thus I closed an old chapter of my life, leaving bloody tracks in the snow behind me, and stepped into a new circle of trials, with the hope that somewhere ahead lay redemption, or at the very least, a chance to feel human once more. Story 2. I arrived in St. Helens early in the morning, when the fog was still casting low clouds over the withered grass. Everything around breathed autumn. Crimson and golden leaves carpeted the road, and the orange canopy of the maples seemed unnaturally vivid in the gray mist. I felt a strange excitement. I was returning to my family estate after many years away. My father sat nearby, his weariness evident. A recent accident had taken a heavy toll on his health. Yet behind his apparent frailty, I sensed a hidden anxiety, as if a burdensome memory of the past was once again pounding at his mind. The house stood deep in the forests of Upper Michigan, and when we pulled up to its crumbling gates, I saw nature reclaiming what was once a well-kept estate. Overgrown bushes, ruined stone paths, and ancient trees with drooping branches nearly touching the ground lent the place an air of neglect and mystery. Yet through the tilted shutters, something monumental still shone through, a remnant of the once prosperous Rivers family legacy. A chill ran through me as I stepped out of the car, despite the air being mild and almost warm for October. While my father slowly made his way to the porch, leaning on his cane, I decided to explore the yard. On the damp soil near the old flower beds, I noticed strange prints, large, elongated tracks that were clearly not from a deer or a moose. Their depth suggested a creature of significant weight, and their form seemed almost wolfish, yet too large to be one. A mysterious chill crept into my thoughts, and I felt my heart tighten with a sudden sense of threat. At the door itself, another surprise awaited. On a slanted bench lay old amulets. The burnt symbols etched into them were eerie and strange, reminiscent of runes I'd once caught a glimpse of in mystical books. Though I couldn't decipher these signs, I sensed they carried an ancient significance. My father noticed my confusion and, choosing his words carefully, explained that our family had long been steeped in legends of the Dog Man, a half-man, half-wolf who had guarded these lands for ages. As I listened, I realized that our lineage was interwoven with tales where reality mingled with the supernatural. My unease grew, for the house and the dark forest around it seemed to possess a life of their own, filled with mysterious symbols and an ever-present sense of impending danger. From the moment morning broke, I decided that my father and I needed to carefully inspect the property. I wanted to ascertain whether something supernatural truly lay hidden here, or if my fears were merely being fueled by the decrepit surroundings. The fog hung between the trees, and with every step on the damp earth, I sensed that each footfall echoed into the unknown depths of the forest. We proceeded slowly, carefully surveying our surroundings. Leaves, stirred by the wind, rustled as they fell at our feet, as if whispering in a strange, unintelligible tongue. After a while, we stumbled upon a series of enigmatic marks scorched into the bark of the pines and birches. These symbols looked like ancient runes, straight lines and breaks forming bizarre patterns. Looking closer, I noticed that similar marks were also present on stones scattered along the perimeter of the forest. They seemed to radiate a subtle warmth, despite the cool air, and that anomaly frightened me more than any tale. Back in the house, I ascended to the attic in search of old documents and discovered a worn leather diary. Dusty pages bore faded entries. Dates from the mid-19th century, references to rituals, mysterious beings, and bloody ceremonies. It all sounded like mad fiction, yet I sensed that the words were penned in despair, as if the author was attempting to etch a warning for posterity. The more I read, the more it became clear that the Rivers family didn't just believe in the Dogman. They had forged a sort of pact with it. The nebulous term land guardianship was coupled with references to sacrifices and obligations. Then my father revealed another strange artifact among the old relics, a small metal amulet etched with symbols nearly identical to those we had seen on the trees. It appeared that this item was the key to our family secret and played a crucial role in the rituals described in the diary. I felt a surge of both horror and curiosity. If the legend of the Dogman was more than just a fairy tale, then our family had indeed once made a pact with the forces of the forest. Night fell, and darkness enveloped the house like a heavy blanket. The old floorboards creaked, and the wind tapped the walls with its branches, evoking eerie images in my mind. Sleep was nowhere in the air. I lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling and straining to hear every sound outside the windows. Closer to midnight, I heard a strange wailing that chilled me to the bone. It shifted, sometimes morphing into a low growl, sometimes into an eerie wail akin to the cry of a wounded animal. I managed to get up and quietly stepped into the corridor, careful not to wake my father. From the upstairs window, I gazed out into the yard, bathed in pale moonlight. Through the tree branches, something large and dark flickered, moving faster than a mere shadow. Feeling my throat dry up, I held my breath. Then the strange creature vanished, and I couldn't tell if it was a product of my imagination or the real silhouette of the Dogman gliding among the trees. My heart pounded so loudly that I could scarcely hear my own thoughts. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight dispelled the night's fog, I stepped into the backyard and discovered huge paw prints once more. The moist earth made the tracks sharply visible, long with sharp claws. They didn't resemble those of any ordinary creature. A disquieting heaviness gripped my chest. It appeared that the Dogman was indeed roaming close by. Even though my father was weak, he took my concerns seriously, reminding me of family tales recounting similar encounters. By all accounts, the emergence of the Dogman indicated that something in our family pact had broken. Our apprehension escalated, and we resolved to think about measures of defense. Standard traps or firearms were unlikely to help against inhuman strength. but we recalled the ritual methods for warding off evil spirits described in the old records: burning sage using special amulets, and marking protective symbols on the walls. Deep down, I understood that if the creature truly possessed supernatural powers, our defenses might only serve as a feeble deterrent. But inaction was not an option, so we began preparations for the coming night, hoping for the best. I kept replaying in my mind the image of the dogman whose silhouette I seemed to have seen among the trees, and the more I contemplated this creature, the more it became clear that the forest would not let us go unchallenged. The ancient power, hidden in the depths of our family history, had already been set free. I realized that I had to act immediately. That morning, I headed into town, where I found a small firearms shop. Among the dusty displays, I managed to order special silver bullets for my rifle. They said silver was a legendary remedy against werewolves and other unholy creatures. And although the dogman was not mentioned explicitly in any book I knew, I decided that any opportunity should be seized. When I returned, my father retrieved from a dust-covered trunk a silvery medallion that had belonged to my grandfather. According to our family records, this amulet granted its bearer a special connection with the forest spirits. We burned sage around it, as the diary prescribed. The cleansing ritual supposedly endowed the talisman with added strength. I felt strange repeating these ritualistic actions, which I had until recently dismissed as mere superstitions. Yet the memories of the peculiar tracks and that nocturnal silhouette of the dogman compelled me to set aside my usual skepticism. Even if it appeared like a display of mysticism, common sense urged me not to discount any method of protection. The next step was to secure the property. My father and I circled the house, hanging amulets from an old trunk onto the tree branches. I meticulously inscribed the same symbols I had seen in the diary on the door frames and windowsills. The previous owners had clearly done something similar, as faint runic marks were discernible on the weathered boards of the house. I applied new layers to rejuvenate the lines that had worn away over time. Simultaneously, I sprayed a herbal concoction described by my great-great-grandfather. Sage, wormwood, and fine silver powder were its ingredients. Finally, as dusk painted the sky in hues of violet and red, I took out my rifle and loaded it with silver bullets. A deep, muffled sense of dread pounded within me, yet it was accompanied by resolve. I could not let the creature, plucked from the depths of our family legend, destroy our home or injure my father. By the light of an old lamp, I once more immersed myself in the diary's pages. The yellowed pages contained descriptions of rituals, secret maps, and references to an abandoned place in the forest, a mine where, according to legend, the most potent rites were performed. It seemed that the solution might be hidden there, but first I had to survive the night ahead. With preparations complete, I awaited the darkness with a chilling apprehension that grew like an impending storm. Night had fallen, and the forest was plunged into a gloomy silence, broken only occasionally by the rustle of branches. I stood on the porch, gripping my rifle loaded with silver bullets, straining to listen to the sinister cacophony of sounds. A baying that shifted into a roar, followed by a wrenching howl after which everything fell silent. My heart pounded as my imagination conjured up the most terrifying images. Then suddenly, through the wavering line of trees, a colossal figure emerged, the dogman. Its eyes caught the moonlight, giving them an almost demonic gleam. For a split second, I was frozen, studying its muscular body and elongated snout that seemed both bestial and human. The creature halted as if waiting. I raised my rifle, but in that very moment the dogman darted to the side and my shot rang out into empty space. Soon enough it reappeared, from the left on the far side of the yard. My nerves were stretched to their limit. I realized it was taunting me, testing my reaction. Then the dogman leaped onto the fence, smashing through one of its sections, and with a fearsome roar, it vanished into the dark thicket. In the morning, as I surveyed the yard, I found clear signs of a struggle. Tufts of fur, or something resembling it, embedded in the ground, depressions in the earth and broken branches. My father, though trying to stay upbeat, had acquired a few scratches. He looked dejected, yet insisted that the important thing was that we had survived. Seeing his injuries ignited a surge of fury in me. The dogman wasn't just a ghost of the past. It was a real danger, capable of destroying us. Our silver bullets had proven insufficient, and all our defenses had only managed to keep the creature at bay from a direct attack. It was as if it were toying with us, waiting for the perfect moment. Later that day in the forest, I stumbled upon a strange sight. Remnants of ritual candles and fragments of faded photographs showing vague silhouettes with wolf-like heads. Perhaps these were remnants of ancient cultic ceremonies that our ancestors once performed deep in the woods. The family diary also mentioned similar rituals. Everything pointed to the fact that the dogman was not a random visitor, but part of a past that was now banging at the doors of the present. It was becoming clear. To stop the attacks, mere defense wasn't enough. I had to uncover the origins of this dark legend and understand what role the Rivers family had played in a pact with the ancient forces that had awakened amid the foggy autumn woods. Delving deeper into the diary, I came across a map of the area dated to the late 19th century. It marked an old mine north of the estate, a place where, according to the records, my ancestors once went to perform special rituals. Everything converged. It seemed that the key to either severing or restoring the pact with the forest forces was hidden there. Taking my flashlight, I set off toward the abandoned tunnels nestled among overgrown pine groves. Clumps of fog clung to my legs, and the soft rustling of the needles only heightened my apprehension. Inside the mine, a dank staleness reigned. The support beams were rotted, and chunks of rock had collapsed in places. I proceeded cautiously, examining the walls that bore scorched markings, very much like those I had seen on the trees. The tunnels narrowed, and the oppressive silence pressed in, wrapping my mind in a sticky fear. Soon I reached a massive stone door, through a half-open gap of which a faint light seeped in. Squeezing through, I found myself in a spacious chamber that resembled an ancient shrine. The stone floor was dusted with grime, and debris lay piled in the corners. Carved reliefs adorned the walls, scenes of people bowing before beings with lupine features. In the center stood a stone altar, covered in mysterious inscriptions and faded stains that looked like remnants of ritual fire or blood. Upon the altar, I discovered an object reminiscent of the amulet I'd seen back home. Nearby lay an old scroll, written in runes similar to those found in the diary. The inscriptions described a pact. My ancestors had begged the forest forces for prosperity and protection, and in return had committed to sacrificial rites that reinforced their bond with the dogman who acted as a guardian. Over time, the Rivers family had lost the knowledge of these rituals, and the dogman, it seemed, had deemed this a betrayal. Now, it had appeared to remind us of a broken covenant and to collect its due. I realized then that the forest was not merely inhabited by a mystical creature. It was itself a reservoir of ancient power, sustained by these rituals. The dogman was only an instrument, a manifestation of nature's will clothed in a fearsome guise. As I made my way back toward the exit of the mine, I felt the suffocating weight of an uncovered truth settle upon my shoulders. Thoughts raced through my mind. Should I shatter the remnants of the pact and release the wild force? Or try to find a way to restore balance, without which the forest would never find peace? The journey home seemed dreadfully long, for along with it came the realization that the decision would ultimately fall to me. I returned at dusk, acutely aware that time was running short. The house was enveloped in a ringing silence, as though the very air were thick with the premonition of a decisive event. My father looked haggard, yet he tried to help me bolster our defenses. Together we arranged fresh amulets, burned sage throughout the rooms, and recited the ritual words from the diary. For the first time, I felt the power stirring in our family records, as if our ancestors were still with us, guiding me. Yet the unease did not leave me for a second. The dogman was real and formidable, and no incantation could guarantee victory. Darkness descended swiftly, and the forest came alive. In the distance, I heard a familiar howl like that of a pack of wolves converging on the hunt. Yet within those sounds I could also detect a guttural roar that sent a chill deep into my skull. I stepped out onto the porch, clutching both my rifle and the amulet, which radiated a strange warmth. Soon the dogman appeared at the edge of the yard, illuminated by a stark beam of moonlight. It looked even more massive and menacing than before, and our eyes met. Its yellow, blazing gaze conveyed both fury and a sorrowful, almost thoughtful melancholy, as if it were a guardian tired of an eternal hunt. I fired a silver bullet. The creature arched its body and lunged sideways so swiftly that the shot missed. Then it charged at me, and I felt a powerful blow knock me off my feet. A searing pain shot through my side, yet I fought to keep hold of my rifle. My father tried to help, but the dogman growled menacingly, forcing him to retreat. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father lose his balance and fall. In that moment, it seemed as if the dogman was already raising its paw to deliver a fatal strike. Summoning the last of my strength, I pressed the amulet to my chest and whispered the words I had learned from the diary. Suddenly, the air grew thick. My ears filled with a dull roar, and the dogman froze for a moment, as if trapped in viscous space. Seizing the opportunity, I fired several rapid shots. The creature emitted a piercing shriek that rattled the eardrums and for the first time showed signs of weakness. Shuddering, it tumbled to the side, let out a tormented roar, and bolted deep into the forest, dissolving into the night. I lay on the grass, breathing heavily, watching as the fearsome figure disappeared among the trees. Our victory, at that moment, was only partial. The dogman had retreated, but the sense of a formidable power, one that belonged solely to this ancient pact, still lingered. The next day brought a lull, but not peace. The estate looked like a battlefield. Broken branches, scattered amulets, trampled flower beds, and a partially destroyed fence. Both my father and I bore wounds that, while not life-threatening, were enough to confirm that the dogman was merciless. A slight relief came from knowing that the beast had withdrawn, but the nagging question remained. For how long? I delved back into the diary, poring over every page. On the yellowed sheets, I found additional references to final rituals that could either bind the Rivers family forever to the forest forces or free it at the cost of dire consequences. It turned out that the pact could not simply be broken. if one renounced the obligations, a force even more sinister than the dogman might be unleashed. On the contrary, by agreeing to take on the role of guardian, I would assume the responsibility of performing rites to appease the forest, a commitment that would condemn me to eternal vigilance at the threshold between the human world and ancient spirits. I had to decide whether I was ready to tread that sacrificial path, or if I would dare to break the pact, unleashing untamed ancient powers. I stepped onto the threshold of the estate and gazed into the forest, its dark expanse unfolding silently before me. The autumn colors, so vivid by day, now seemed dulled beneath a leaden sky. In the distant town, life continued its ordinary rhythm, while here, deep in Upper Michigan, I stood alone face to face with a secret that our family had guarded for centuries. My father couldn't offer a definitive answer. He was but a keeper of memories, lacking the strength to resolve the conflict. In the end, the decision rested with me and with that ancient forest, which breathed around us, concealing an unfathomable magic within its depths. The diary's final line echoed like a refrain. The truth lies hidden in the shadows, and as long as hearts harbor fear, the forces of the forest will live on. I felt that these words were not just addressed to the reader, but to my very soul. The dogman was only a fragment of that force which awakens when a pact is broken. Perhaps by choosing the path of reconciliation, I could tame this guardian, becoming the link that upholds the ancient covenant. Yet my fear warned me that any step in that direction would bring new calamities. Aware that there were several paths to choose from, I stood frozen, sensing the dark forest shiver on the horizon. There, among the interlaced branches, perhaps the dogman was lurking, waiting for the choice I would make. And whatever the outcome, there was no turning back. Ancient powers never release those who have once touched their secrets.